Big mobile games are often soulless cash grabs designed to drastically slow down your progress at some point and demand inconceivable amounts of money. And you either pay to keep playing at a reasonable pace or stick with free-to-play and stay behind forever. Actually, to be fair, some games let you pay a smaller price for some content that will let you stay relevant up until next patch, and then you have to probably pay again. So how do free-to-play Warhammer games fit in all of this? Apart from some memes, I don't really know anything about them, so I am going in completely blind and unbiased. And just to be clear with you, I will try to give each game enough time to experience every possible aspect of them and beat them if possible. But I probably won't keep playing any of them for months, unless I really enjoy them. So rather than reviewing, this will be more of an early game guide, to let you decide if any of the games would be enjoyable for you. I also won't be reviewing paid games in this video, since I am planning to do that in a separate one. So I think that's it for the intro. Let's start with the first game, which is Warhammer 40k Space Wolf. Space Wolf is a hybrid between a tactical game and a card game. In the main single-player campaign, you are sent on a set of missions in which you will be fighting Chaos Space Marines and Chaos Cultists. For most of the game, you will control 3 characters, with one of them being your main hero, whose deck you get to customize between the missions. The game is turn-based, and during each turn, every character on the battlefield can play up to 2 cards. Most cards are weapons, meaning that they are able to do some type of damage to your enemies, but there are also cards connected to the movement, cycling through deck, adding some defense to your character, and so on. So, is the gameplay any good? Well, in my opinion, no it isn't, but let's start from the beginning. Before each mission you can customize your deck, upgrade your armor and pick your assisting characters. Then you are thrown into a battle, and only after a couple of missions you will see the game's biggest flaw, which is repetition and lack of variety. Your mission's goal is always to walk in a somewhat straight line, or to stay in one place and defeat enemies. And yes, the game will sometimes tell you to protect someone, to meet with someone, to kill some Chaos Space Marines in a set amount of time, but you are always doing the same thing. And you know, this would be perfectly fine if the base gameplay was good, but I really can't say that I have enjoyed the mechanics of the battles. But let's start with the thing that is actually very well designed in my opinion, which is the system that decides the turn order. See, every card comes with an effort meter. The better the card is, the more effort point it has. And as I previously mentioned, you can play up to 2 cards every turn, so the values of the effort meters get added up on each character, and the turn order is decided based on that. So if you only moved up a couple of spaces to prep for a big shot, you will get to play your next turn sooner. I think that this system works really well and adds a nice layer of complexity to what would otherwise be an extremely boring experience. Still, it's the only thing in the game that I really like. So let's take a look at how a typical battle plays out, because in this game almost every battle is a typical battle. The game will send hordes of enemies at you, but they won't really be varied in any way, and every single battle will look almost exactly the same, or at least it looked like that for me. I would engage the enemy at a shooting distance or let them engage me, as it didn't really matter, and then I would just randomly pick a weapon and shoot at the nearest possible enemy. And that's what I would do up until mission 3-4, which is like a middle of the game. All I had to do was mindlessly pick weapons from my hand and shoot at enemies, and I was never in any danger of losing a mission. And I did all of that with a basic set of cards that you get at the beginning of the game. I never even had to check what is inside. Yeah, the game was that easy. So what happened in the mission 3-4? Well, I got bored a bit and I noticed that the goal of the mission was to reach a place in the distance, so instead of fighting I ran, sacrificing my little helpers, and to my surprise I succeeded, and sadly that was the only moment when I felt any excitement while playing the game. Cause after that I had to return to regular shooting and the gameplay got painfully tedious again. So the most variety in the game comes from the different types of weapons that you can use, each of them having a damage stat and a very specific range. So for melee weapons you have to stand directly in front of your opponent, for sniper rifles you have to stay in the same line, and for bigger rocket launchers you have to be a couple of squares away. However, most weapons like pistols or shotguns can usually shoot an enemy that is up to 4 or 5 squares within your hero's sight. So even if there is a large variety of weapons, you cannot really predict what you will get on your next turn, meaning that you will always have to stay somewhere in the middle range to be able to attack with whatever you get next. There is not much to say about the card collecting part of the game. You can get different kinds of packs for different prices, craft cards cards from resources, increasing your chances for a better card with a premium currency. You also get to upgrade your and your helpers' armors. The prices in the shop are somewhat reasonable for a mobile game. There are also other modes in the game, one being challenges. This mode consists of fighting against waves of enemies, as your squad, or as a chaos servant, and honestly playing that felt like torture. I honestly couldn't bring myself to finish even a single wave of these modes, they were so painfully boring. There is also multiplayer, which is a little better, I guess. This mode adds a bit of variety with different buffs scattered across the map. You also have to just kill the main enemy hero, so you can decide whether to focus on him or kill the smaller guys first. And playing against living opponents was definitely more fun than playing against computer. But still, when I reach this point of the game, I have already had enough of the core gameplay. So sadly, there are some great ideas here, but they are all buried beneath boring and repetitive gameplay, which makes the game a chore to play in the end. Warhammer 40k Lost Crusade. Lost Crusade is not a game, it's a waiting simulator, and its biggest part is expanding your space base by erecting and upgrading your buildings. But the catch is that they are being built in real time by unpaid Imperial workers, so you always have to wait. But don't worry, there is plenty to do in the meantime. So most of the fun in fact comes from clicking shiny yellow buttons. It seems like it doesn't really matter what they do or where they come from, but you are always being bombarded with them, especially in the first hour of the game. Just look at that, I understand that these are rewards for my progress, but I don't understand why they have to be spread over so many screens. Is it just to keep me busy while I wait for my level 8 Space Marine birth machine? How am I even expected to know what all of these things do? To be honest, after 30 minutes of playing, I acquired so many currencies and items that I felt completely lost. This has to be the worst introduction to a game that I have ever seen, and in my opinion, its only purpose is to make you feel like you are achieving something, while in reality, you can spend most of the currencies in a couple of minutes and be stuck at the paywall. So what can you do in the game apart from clicking buttons? Well, at the start you have two options. First one being patrolling your space neighborhood by flying to nearby enemy patrols in real time. Let's watch such a mission together. Amazing. The other, I guess, big part of the gameplay is collecting Warhammer heroes and fighting battles with them. So let's take a look at how battles work. Well, you start with your heroes automatically running to the right side of the screen and attacking your enemies. The one thing that you can do is to send supporting units or use a skill that your characters have. The gameplay was so extremely engaging that the authors of the game had to add a button that lets you speed up this part and let the computer automatically handle your job, so you could go back to stimulating your dopamine receptors as fast as you can. And to be perfectly honest, there might be some good gameplay in the Lost Crusade, as you can join alliances that let you fight bigger opponents with your guildmates or attack other players on a huge star map, but I never got to that point, as when I saw that the next upgrade of my ship would take over an hour, I uninstalled the game. At the end, I had one good moment with the app, and it was when I was woken up at around 12 PM as I got a notification which said that Rogaldorn invited me to join him in a battle. That honestly felt pretty epic. Warhammer Chaos and Conquest. This is exactly the same game as Lost Crusade, but it's set in the fantasy universe. Instead of upgrading your base, you upgrade your fortress. Instead of the star map, you have a world map, which looks exactly the same. And instead of collecting heroes to use them in fights, you collect heroes that do nothing but add stats to your army. Yes, the game is an exact copy of Lost Crusade, but without the real-time fights, so now all you do is just wait for your army to reach a place and go back with some items. So do I have anything good to say about this? Well, the intro wasn't that obnoxious, you don't get as much meaningless stuff at the beginning of the game, but this time everything that you do is more mindless, as I have spent a good 15 minutes just clicking buttons that the arrow was pointing me to. I didn't really want to waste too much time on that, so I checked some late game footage of the game online, and it looks like nothing changes as you play. I cannot stress this enough, this game has no gameplay, it's just waiting and button clicking. Warhammer Combat Cards 40k Edition. Combat Cards is a first game on this list which gave me some genuine fun. It's a very simple 1v1 card game with one main quirk that makes the battles interesting. So each player starts with a small deck of up to 9 cards depending on your level. Each card is a regular character called Bodyguard here or a Warlord, and you can only have one of those in your deck. The Warlord will be your most important unit, as he gives you a passive skill that usually applies to the rest of the characters, and if he is destroyed you lose the game. So at the beginning of each game you and your opponent choose 3 cards to start your game with. And sadly, as you can see, the game didn't work too good on my phone, as half the cards from my hand were always appearing off screen and I couldn't use them. I also wasn't really able to see some of the cards' statistics right away and I had to click them constantly, but it didn't cause me too much trouble, so I won't mention that thing again. Anyway, when the players place their card on the battlefield, a first player is decided and that player gets to make a move. And when I said that the core gameplay is very simple, I really meant it, because on your turn, everything that you do is deciding on one of the 3 forms of attack, which could be melee, psychic or ranged. When you pick one of the options, your characters attack the enemies in front of them using the chosen type of attack. Seems too simple at first, but that is where complexity kicks in. First of all, characters can counter-attack. When you hit someone in melee, for example, he will hit you back if he also has a melee stat. But what if a character doesn't have a melee stat and for example you choose to attack with it? Well, it means that the character has either a buff or a debuff, because the strength of your attack doesn't only rely on the card, but also on the status of one of these 3 bars that are directly above each attack type. So some characters can fill up your bars and take away power from the enemy ones instead of attacking. Also, at the end of your turn you always get a power up to 2 attacks that you didn't use, so if you choose ranged attack, your next melee and psychic attack will be more powerful. Unless of course your enemy steals your power, then they actually might be weaker. And that is not all. Each Warlord comes with a different passive ability, and all cards can be upgraded to also have some type of passive or one-time use ability. All of this combined creates quite a complex experience with many valid builds of your deck. I usually preferred going for the more versatile style where I could utilize each of the attacks, but I saw people focusing on one type of attack and it also seemed to work quite well. So what about the card collecting? Well, there is over 400 cards to collect, and if you get any duplicates, you can upgrade a card to a higher level so it gets more powerful. The max level a card can have is 14, so judging by the fact that each upgrade is more expensive than the last, I am gonna guess that you would need around 100 copies of each card to get to the highest level, and please correct me if I am wrong on that. The cards are divided by factions, which represent 40k factions really well. Khorne warriors like melee, Grey Knights hit like trucks with psychic powers, and Tau are only strong in ranged combat. There is definitely a lot to choose from here. The only thing that I don't like is the look of the cards. I would much rather see some nice art, even if it's reused for 100th time, rather than pictures of miniatures. And don't get me wrong, I love how the miniatures look on the tabletop, I just think that they don't really fit anywhere else. Apart from regular battles, you also have a ranked mode, with monthly rewards and some single player stuff like mini campaigns and raids. You can also join an alliance dedicated to a certain faction, which results in you getting more cards of this faction when opening packs. And now we smoothly transfer to the elephant in the room, which is monetization. And it could be simply described as somewhat reasonable compared to other games of this type. The stuff that I got for free during my first few days was enough to make a couple of decks and have fun. Of course, you can buy your packs and premium currencies, but there are some daily free chests and some that require you to watch an ad. You also get rewards for winning games, and here comes the only part of the game which I truly hate. If you win a game you get a pack, but to open the pack you have to wait for a couple of hours or pay extra. You also can't have more than 4 packs at the same time, so after winning 4 games your incentive to play gets drastically lower. But still, it's not as bad as many other games of this type. Overall, I highly recommend you check out this game, especially if you are looking for a new card game to play. Warhammer 40k Freeblade. When I was going in blind into those games, a rail shooter definitely wasn't something that I was expecting, as I thought that this genre had died years ago, but here we are. This definitely is going to be the most unique game on this list, a single shooter in a sea of base builders and card games. And right at the beginning I have to say that I love how the devs chose to go with an Imperial Knight as a character that we control. It definitely fits the genre and gives an opportunity to see how powerful these beasts are in the lore, which is great as they aren't very common in the 40k media. So at first I was very excited, thinking that I finally got a proper single player game that wouldn't require my monthly salary to play, but you probably already know how naive that seems. Anyway, how do you play the game? As with most rail shooters, you aim and shoot at your enemies. You usually have access to 3 different weapons, one being your main gun that overheats after a while, and the other 2 being different kinds of bigger cannons, auto shooters or rocket launchers. Once in a while, you also have to fight your enemies at a melee range, which sadly looks the same every time. You just tap the screen at the right time to deal damage. Your main enemies in the game are orcs, but you will also get to fight some chaos forces. The environments are usually nice and varied enough not to get boring. The game will also quite often throw new enemies at you, with some requiring to tap them to activate a shield that saves you from their attack, and some that throw grenades at you that you need to shoot down in mid-air. The missions in this game last anywhere between 1.5 to 3 minutes, so the gameplay doesn't get stale. Missions are short, exciting and action-packed, and I really enjoyed playing the game until I hit a paywall. And when it hit me good. Let me explain why. Each and every mission requires you to upgrade your knight, so you have to spend resources to strengthen parts of your loadout, but that isn't always possible. See, when you fully upgrade a part and it's still not enough, you have no choice but to make a new one, which requires you to wait for the upgrade to be done or pay the premium currency to have it instantly. Near the end of the 3rd chapter I ran out of both currencies, the regular one and the premium one, so I had to go back to older levels to grind them. At least they get a second difficulty level, so they don't get too boring, but still, playing those levels over and over again wasn't very fun, and it got even worse when I noticed that as time went on, my knight was starting missions with less and less health. Why is that? Well, it turns out that you don't get fully healed between missions and you get weaker as you play. Your health and damage get reduced with each mission, and to revert that, you have to either wait for a couple of hours, pay, or watch like 8 ads in a row. It's so great to be punished for playing a game. And if this wouldn't be enough, the difficulty goes up really fast and it's impossible to keep up without the grind. So you either pay or are trapped in a loop of grinding the same levels over and over again and watching ads to be able to play. What else can I add? There is a multiplayer mode and it's fun, but I don't really care at this point, let's move on. Warhammer Age of Sigmar Realm War. This is a deck building auto battler game, kind of similar to the auto battles that we saw in the Lost Crusade, but much better. First of all, the game is focused on multiplayer and it doesn't mess around. After a short tutorial, you are thrown straight into ranked mode and you have to make do. I honestly like that approach. It's nice that the game doesn't treat me like an idiot for a change. Still, it would be nice to have more of a casual mode to test your deck. Sadly, the game doesn't have too much to offer in terms of variety. As always, you start with assembling your deck, and sadly most of them will be very similar, especially at the beginning of the game. There is a total of 58 cards to acquire, and on the lowest ranks you can only get like a third of those, and once again you can upgrade your cards by acquiring an ungodly amount of duplicates. Also, there is only one type of arena, with different graphical overlays depending on your current rank. The arena is divided into 2 paths. The main one is guarded by a tower that will automatically shoot at your opponent units. There is also the back path that goes around the tower. If 3 of your special units manage to cross a half point of that path, you will get a very powerful unit that you can play for free. Every other unit or spell comes at a cost of energy that slowly replenishes all the time. Also, some units are called heroes and they have one-time use spells. This, combined with other spells that you can put in your deck and your warlord spells, makes for a very dynamic game. Warlord is of course your main unit that always stays in the back and if killed ends the game. Now I can say that I didn't enjoy the game. As I said, it's fast and dynamic, you have to make decisions on the spot and a single missed spell or a misplaced unit can sometimes turn the game around. And to be completely honest with you, a big part of my enjoyment came from the fact that I was winning almost every single game, which could be explained in 2 ways. One being that the game throws some bots at you on the lower ranks so you can quickly level up. Or the second being that I have found a winning strategy, which also could be the case since I only had trouble winning when my opponents were doing exactly the same thing as I was doing. So, to win easily, spam your heroes to the back lane to get the special unit as fast as possible. Only send out regular units if they block your hand. When you get the special guy, forget about the back lane and focus on destroying enemy's tower as quickly as possible. If you do that first, it is very unlikely that you'll lose the game. This game uses reward system, similar to the one from combat cards. You win a game and you get a reward that you have to wait for. You also can't have more than 4 of those at the same time, so you usually play a lot of games without many rewards unless you pay. Overall, the game is quite fun. It lacks variety that would make me want to play it more, but it definitely can keep you on edge, and winning games against BMing opponents is very satisfying. Warhammer Quest Silver Tower. It's hard to talk at length about this game. Silver Tower is as simple as turn-based tactical games get. You basically control a group of 3 characters. You have your mage, your archer and your warrior. They all have different attacks and different skill, so each plays a little bit different. In the game you will traverse Chaos Realms in order to get to the top of the Silver Tower, and you will of course face many enemies along the way. Each turn all of your characters can do up to 2 actions, which are moving, attacking or casting a spell. Then the enemies do the same and so on. The game is divided into these chapters, each taking place on a different map. Then these chapters are divided into single missions that start where the previous mission has ended. And the single levels are very short, usually lasting less than 10 turns total. So, the gameplay is very simple and most fights will be decided by your character's positioning. Sadly, there isn't much else to it, and the repetitiveness gets tedious pretty quickly. The fact that most objectives are to either kill something or to rush into a certain area doesn't really help. Of course, in the meantime you can upgrade your heroes with materials that you get from missions or buy with real money, but it doesn't really change too much. You can also buy new heroes, but that is premium currency exclusive. There are some daily missions, but they are exactly the same as main campaign, and I guess you are supposed to grind them if you get stuck. And that is what happened to me once. I was getting killed in one hit and there wasn't much else I could do, so I had to play a couple of these to have a chance at the campaign. Overall, I don't think I'd say that the game is good. It's too simple and has too little variety to make me want to play anymore. The Horus Heresy Legion's TCG. I know that it's unfair to start a review with a comparison to another game, but it would be hard not to mention all of the similarities to Hearthstone. This game is for sure heavily inspired by it and maybe even blatantly copying it in some aspects. So, the game starts with a quite nice intro. We learn about the mechanics by playing some battles against the AI. These battles tell the story of the Istavan Free Atrocity, which is a great way to start a game about the Horus Heresy. The battles are also voiced, which adds a lot of flavor to the game.
No, they're charging towards us. Make them pay for the Emperor.
And if you have ever played Hearthstone, you've probably noticed the similarities in gameplay by now. You start each game with a mulligan phase, you have 1 mana or energy or whatever at the beginning, and you gain 1 more with each turn. The cards are either instant used spells called tactics, or units that have health, attack points, and usually some additional effects that are compressed into these special keywords, like Backlash, meaning that the card does something when it dies, or Rally, meaning that the card does something when played from hand, or Frontline, which is Taunt. It's just Taunt from Hearthstone. And the similarities don't end just yet. You also get a 0 mana card that gives you 1 mana if you go second, and your hero, which is again called Warlord here, has a special ability that he can use once per turn. The one of 2 big differences from Hearthstone is that the Warlords are treated as cards that stay on the battlefield. They also have attack points and thus they can attack like any other character. And I really like this idea, to be honest. In a game where your goal is to destroy the enemy warlord, this creates additional depth for aggressive decks and also to those more focused on controlling the board. The other difference is that some of the regular units also have abilities that they can use once per turn instead of attacking. So, when you beat the intro, you unlock all other game modes. These are casual and ranked matches against other players, single player campaigns and events. In the single player campaign you get a hero and a starter deck, and you play some battles that get harder with each round. Between the battles you get to upgrade your deck by choosing a set of free cards, or sometimes by upgrading your warlord. And that mode is really fun, however for some reason there is only 1 campaign available at a time, which changes like every couple weeks, so there is not that much gameplay here. Event is a draft type game, where you build your deck by choosing a set of free cards until you have 30 of them. Then you play a bunch of games and get rewards based on how many of those games you've won. You have 3 lives and you can win a maximum of 12 games. And the main part of the game are of course the constructed battles where you build your deck and play against other people. And it's worth mentioning that there seems to be a ton of variety in the game, with most major factions having their own sets of cards with unique skills. My only criticism here is that you don't have much variety when you first begin playing. After getting all the starter chests and playing some matches, I still didn't have enough cards to build a second deck, so I was forced to play with a slightly modified starter deck. At least I got to know the cards by playing against varied enemies. So the game is good. I would even say that it is very good, which shouldn't be a surprise, as it copied most of its best ideas from the most popular computer card game ever. Still, I cannot be mad that we have a fun and complex 40k mobile game that doesn't require hundreds of dollars to play. Warhammer Oddysey. I've never been a fan of the MMO genre, so I'll keep this one short. Odyssey seems pretty standard for an MMO, at least at the beginning. You follow a trail of quests where you talk to some people, kill some mobs and do some other typical activities which mainly require you to press a button at a certain location. Soon after the tutorial you enter some more open areas with side quests, merchants and so on. You can grind mobs, gather loot or buy better equipment. I personally don't see any appeal to this type of game, as the fighting consists only of mindlessly tapping attack buttons or applying a buff once in a while. The maps may be large, but they aren't very good looking and have little to offer in terms of any variety. I know I've only played a tiny bit of this game, but I just couldn't force myself to continue with quests that are all the same. Basically, the game required no attention from me. I just had to follow the yellow arrow and press attack button, so I got bored very quickly. And judging by some online footage, nothing really changes in the late game. The Horus Heresy Drop Assault. Drop Assault is It's another base builder. You place some buildings, then you wait on them to be built, or you pay the premium currency. Of course, only one building can be placed in a building queue at a time, so you will be forced to wait for God knows how long. I personally don't know, because I turned the game off before I even got to the point where I had to wait for more than a couple of minutes. Apart from the base building, you have a map that you can slowly explore, some action-packed gameplay when you deploy troops and watch them fight, and there is also probably some multiplayer, but I couldn't figure out how it works in the 15 minutes I dedicated to this game. Mordheim Warband Skirmish. Mordheim is yet another turn-based strategy game, but it might be the best one that we've seen so far. The basics of the game are pretty standard, but they allow a fair dose of variety, which can be seen from the start of the game, where you choose your faction from 12 possible ones, including some standard humans, but also chaos cultists or orcs. Sadly, you can only choose one of the factions for free, and if you want to try another one after picking your first, you have to pay with the premium currency. But still, there is more variety to be found within each faction, as you get to recruit, upgrade and arm your characters between the missions. And yeah, they are generally divided into melee and ranged weapons, and yeah, the skills and weapons and armor only change their stats, but it's still more than we usually get with these types of games. But let's get to the meat of it and see if the gameplay is any good and does it offer anything interesting. Well, to be honest, it does and it doesn't. And I think that you will have to answer that question for yourself. So, each mission starts with your team being thrown on a map, and the first couple of turns are always boring as hell, as you have to either wait for the enemies to come up to you, or manually start moving each character up the map to meet with your opponents faster. And yes, I understand that it is a part of the gameplay, but it is a boring part, and usually there are like two paths where you can meet your enemy anyway, so it doesn't add much to the tactics part of the game. As for your turn, each character can move and attack once during each turn. Also, when a character moves up behind the cover, it will get some additional defense. Other than that, you can skip a turn and that's kinda it. Some characters have some special modifiers that allow them, for example, attack twice in a turn, but yeah, the variety sadly ends on the battlefield, which doesn't necessarily mean that the game is bad, but rather simple and a bit repetitive, to be honest. And while this can get pretty tedious during the single player campaign, the game also features multiplayer, which I have found to be much more fun, as it is infinitely more satisfying to defeat real opponents with a team that you've created yourself. So, if you are looking for a simple tactical game, this one might be for you. Necromunda Gang Skirmish. I will keep this one brief as this game is very similar to Mordheim and plays almost exactly the same. Managing your team looks exactly the same, with you being able to buy equipment and upgrade skills of your team. The fights also play almost exactly the same, with some minor differences, like you being able to prone, open and close doors, or guard for additional defense points. It really is the same game, but personally I would recommend Mordheim over this one for one simple reason, which is graphics. As Necromunda can be really dull and depressing to look at, as it takes place in the Imperial Hive City, so you have to look at some ugly warehouses all the time. Mordheim, however, has some nice and relatively colorful graphics that don't really get boring. So in the tier list portion of this video, I'll try to give all of these games another chance, so let's start with the ones that I am most sure about. So Space Wolf is not a good game, but it had some good ideas. I've probably said enough about this game in the review. I will put it in the D tier. Okay, Chaos and Conquest. Like, after doing the reviews, I've tried to think about anything redeemable about Chaos and Conquest and the Lost Crusade game, and they both just fit perfectly into the F tier. There is just no way that anything good can be said about these games from me. I hate this. And I put in Lost Crusade a bit higher than Chaos and Conquest, like, at least it has some gameplay. Combat Cards is an easy A for me. Like, the game didn't blow me away, but looking at all the other games, like, this one is unique, it has some unique ideas. You can see that the authors had put so much love into it, like even taking pictures of all the miniatures and making cards out of them, giving them flavor text, and just designing everything. Without being too obnoxious with the monetization, I think that Combat Cards is the game that deserves to be played. Drop Assault, like, I don't even know what this is. Like, I cannot even say anything. Like, the multiplayer didn't work for me. It just seems like a sadder version of Lost Crusade. I'm sorry. Yeah, this belongs into the bottom of the F tier. Freeblade. I might have been a bit too harsh on Freeblade. Like, I've played a bit more and the grind wasn't that exhaustive. I think that it deserves to be... I'd put it somewhere between the B and the C tier, like low B tier, high C tier, something like that. I'll stick it into B right now and then we'll figure out where it belongs. Legion's TCG is another great card game. Obviously, every single great idea has been copied, but it still doesn't change the fact that it's a good game, so let's put it into A tier, but behind Combat Cards. Mordheim and Necromunda were kind of fun. They had some nice ideas behind them, but in the end I feel like they were both kind of repetitive. Not as repetitive as Space Wolves, but yeah, C tier. I think it's fair. Oddysey goes into the E tier. This game is just walking in a straight line, following the arrow and like pressing one or two buttons to kill your enemies. I didn't really reach the end game, but I saw some footage from the end game and nothing changes. Like, this game could be compared to Lost Crusade in terms of gameplay. Do what the arrow tells you to do and don't think just press one or two buttons. Okay, Age of Sigmar Realm War. I think that honestly this game belongs to the B tier. It doesn't have too much cards, doesn't have too much variety, but like the core gameplay is fun. I was just always having a good time, you know, defeating opponents and actually precision and strategy matter in this game. So yeah, it's a B tier, it's an okay game. I would play it again. And finally, Silver Tower. I think that my review of Silver Tower was kind of good, but after playing this game for another hour after the review, I got seriously bored. I mean, I would rather play this than Space Wolf, I guess, because the gameplay is a bit quicker. You just don't have to wait so much time for your enemies to make a move, and like you can progress through the game faster. It's less painful, but it's still a D tier for me. So now I see that the S tier is the only one unpopulated, so if I had to put something there, this would be Combat Cards, yeah. The most unique idea, the most love put into a game. And that seems to be all for this video. So thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video, and Elden Ring comes out soon, so that's what I will be doing on this channel in the future. Thank you once again, hope you have a great day.